The cargo ship New Horizon drifted through space like a metal whale swimming through an ocean of stars. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his worn leather chair on the bridge, watching the distant lights of planets and space stations through the front window. At 67 years old, Jake had seen more of the galaxy than most people ever would. His gray hair was thin now and deep lines marked his weathered face, but his blue eyes still held the sharp focus of a man who had survived 3 decades in space. "Captain, we're about 6 hours out from the mining station," said Lisa Brooks, from her seat at the engineer's console. She was a young woman with short brown hair and oil stains on her work clothes. Lisa knew every bolt and wire on the New Horizon better than anyone. Danny Chen looked up from his navigation screen. The thin man with black hair and nervous hands had been with Jake for 5 years now. "Sir, I'm picking up some strange readings on the edge of our sensors. Could be nothing, but..." Jake turned his chair toward Danny. "What kind of readings?" "Energy, signatures, moving fast. Could be ships, but they're not showing up on our regular scanners." Jake felt a cold feeling in his stomach. Out here in the outer rim, strange readings usually meant trouble. Pirates, raiders, or worse things that hunted ships like theirs. "How many?" "Hard to tell. Maybe 3 or 4. They're using some kind of stealth technology." Lisa stood up from her console, wiping her hands on a dirty rag. "Should we change? Of course, we could jump to hyperspace and..." The ship shook violently. Emergency lights flashed red across the bridge as alarms started screaming. Jake grabbed his chair to keep from falling as the New Horizon spun like a top. "What hit us?" Jake shouted over the noise. Danny's fingers flew over his controls. "Some kind of electromagnetic pulse. Our engines are dead. Weapons are offline. Even our communications are fried." Through the front window, Jake saw them. 3 massive ships that looked like giant insects made of black metal. They had long, curved hulls covered in spikes and weapon ports. The ships moved through space with a grace that seemed almost alive, like predators circling wounded prey. "Zephyrians," Jake whispered. Everyone in the outer rim knew about the Zephyrians. They were tall alien creatures with hard shells like insects and claws that could cut through steel. They hunted in packs across the galaxy, taking what they wanted and killing anyone who got in their way. The biggest Zephyrian ship moved closer to the New Horizon. Jake could see cutting tools extending from its hull, ready to slice through their ship's metal skin. "Jake, what do we do?" Lisa asked. Her voice was steady, but Jake could see fear in her eyes. "We fight," Jake said simply. He opened a cabinet near his chair and pulled out 3 pulse rifles. He tossed one to Lisa and one to Danny. "They want our ship, they'll have to earn it." The sound of metal being cut filled the air. Sparks showered down from the ceiling as the aliens worked their way through the hull. Jake could smell burning metal and hear the hiss of air trying to escape through tiny holes. "They're coming through the cargo bay," Lisa said, checking her rifle's power cell. "We should head to the engine room. We can make a stand there." "No," Jake said. "We make our stand here, on the bridge. This is our ship." Danny's hands shook as he held his rifle. "Captain, there might be dozens of them. We can't..." The cutting stopped. For a moment, everything was quiet except for the sound of their own breathing. Then the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing everything in dim red light. Jake heard footsteps in the corridor outside the bridge. Not human footsteps. These made clicking sounds on the metal floor like claws tapping against stone. The bridge door exploded inward. 3 Zephyrians rushed in, moving faster than anything that big should be able to move. They were 8 feet tall with long arms and legs. Their bodies were covered in dark, shiny shells that looked like armor. Their heads were narrow with large, compound eyes that reflected the red emergency lights. When they opened their mouths, Jake could see rows of sharp teeth. Lisa fired first. Her pulse rifle lit up the bridge with blue energy, but the blast bounced off the lead Zephyrian's shell without leaving a mark. The alien's clawed hand moved in a blur, and Lisa's rifle flew across the room in pieces. A second later, Lisa followed it, her body hitting the wall with a sound that made Jake's heart break. Danny tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. A Zephyrian caught him before he reached the door. Jake heard Danny scream once, then nothing. Jake stood alone on his bridge, facing 3 alien predators with nothing but an old pulse rifle and 40 years of stubborn pride. He raised the weapon and fired. The energy blast hit the nearest Zephyrian in the chest, making it step back but not fall. The aliens looked at each other and made sounds that might have been laughter. High-pitched clicking noises that echoed off the bridge walls. One of them spoke in perfect English, though its voice sounded like metal scraping against metal. Old human fights, amusing. Jake fired again. This time the Zephyrian didn't even step back. It walked forward slowly like a cat playing with a mouse. "Kill him quick," said another alien. "No," said the first one. "This one has spirit. HFY. We'll find him entertaining. We take him alive." Before Jake could fire a third time, something hit him from behind. Pain exploded through his skull, and darkness swallowed him whole. When Jake woke up, he was lying on a cold metal floor in a small room with no windows. His head felt like someone had hit it with a hammer. He could feel the vibration of ship engines through the floor, but it wasn't the familiar hum of the New Horizon. This engine had a different sound, deeper and more powerful. He was on a Zephyrian. Ship and Lisa and Danny were dead. Jake closed his eyes and tried not to think about their faces. There would be time to mourn later, if he lived long enough. Right now, he needed to figure out how to stay alive in a ship full of alien predators, who thought humans were nothing more than soft, weak prey animals. If only they knew how wrong they were. Jake's small prison cell had no bed, no chair, and no window. Just 4 metal walls, a door with no handle on the inside, and a hole in the floor for waste. The air smelled like chemicals and something else he couldn't identify. Something alien and wrong. He had been awake for 3 days now, maybe 4. It was hard to tell time without sunlight or clocks. The aliens fed him once each day through a slot in the door. The food looked like gray paste and tasted worse, but Jake ate it anyway. He needed strength if he was going to find a way out of this place. The ship's engines never stopped humming. Jake could feel the vibration through the metal floor when he lay down to sleep. Sometimes the engine sound changed, and he knew they were jumping to hyperspace or dropping back into normal space. Each jump meant they were getting farther from human territory and closer to wherever the Zephyrians were taking him. On the 5th day, the door opened. 2 Zephyrians stood in the doorway, their compound eyes reflecting the corridor lights behind them. They were even bigger than Jake remembered, their shell-covered bodies filling the entire doorframe. One of them gestured with a clawed hand. "Come," it said in that metal-scraping voice. "HFY wants to see the human pet." Jake stood up slowly. His back hurt from sleeping on the hard floor, and his legs felt weak, but he kept his face calm and showed no fear. He had learned long ago that predators could smell fear, and showing weakness only made them more aggressive. They walked through corridors that curved and twisted like the inside of some giant seashell. The walls were covered in the same dark, shiny material as the aliens' shells. Symbols and pictures were carved into the metal, showing scenes of battles and hunts. In every picture, Zephyrians were killing other creatures. Jake saw humans in some of the carvings, always shown as small and helpless. The corridor opened into a large room with a high ceiling. Screens covered the walls, showing star maps and what looked like tactical displays. In the center of the room stood the biggest Zephyrian Jake had ever seen. This one was at least 9 feet tall, with scars across its shell and metal decorations hanging from its arms and neck. "I am HFY, pack leader of this hunting ship," the giant alien said. Its voice was deeper than the others, like rocks grinding together. "You are my prize from the human cargo ship." Jake said nothing. He stood straight and looked directly into HFY's compound eyes. The alien leader made that clicking sound that might have been laughter. "The old human has pride. Good. Broken toys are no fun." HFY moved to one of the wall screens and touched it with a claw. The screen lit up, showing a recording of a human colony world. Jake could see cities and farms spread across green continents. "This is Riverside Colony," HFY said. "Pretty world, yes? Good hunting ground." The image changed. Now Jake was watching the same world, but everything was burning. Zephyrian ships filled the sky like a swarm of metal insects. Buildings collapsed under energy weapon fire. Jake could see tiny figures running through the streets, but the distance was too great to make out details. We took 12,000 humans from Riverside, Kreshvar said with satisfaction. Sold them in the slave markets of the outer worlds. Made excellent profit. Jake's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his face blank. Getting angry would only give the alien what it wanted. Your species fascinates me, Kreshvar continued, changing the screen to show another ruined human world. So weak, yet you, spread across the galaxy like some kind of disease. How do prey animals build starships? Other Zephyrians had entered the room while their leader spoke. They formed a semicircle behind Jake, cutting off any escape route. All of them were staring at him with their insect eyes, waiting for him to break down or beg for mercy. I have studied human behavior for 20 years, Kreshvar said. I have watched you in battle. You scatter like frightened rabbits when real predators arrive. Your soldiers abandon their weapons and run. Your leaders surrender rather than fight to the death. The alien leader turned away from the screen and walked closer to Jake. Do you know what we call your species in our language? Soft shell, that cries. Because your skin is so thin, and you make those water drops from your eyes when you are afraid. Several of the other Zephyrians made clicking sounds. They were laughing at him. But you are useful, Kreshvar continued. Humans make good slaves, because you are smart enough to follow orders, but too weak to rebel. Your females produce many offspring. Your males are strong enough for heavy labor, but not strong enough to be dangerous. Jake remained silent. He was learning things about his captors with every word they spoke. They were proud and overconfident. They thought in simple terms about predator and prey. Most importantly, they didn't really understand humans at all. I will tell you a secret, old human, Kreshvar said, leaning down until his alien face was inches from Jake's. We are going to my homeworld. There you will be displayed in the grand arena for all to see. A captured human, proof of our hunting skills. Then you will fight other prisoners for the entertainment of the crowd. You will die in the arena, another Zephyrian added. But first, you will provide much amusement. Kreshvar straightened up and gestured to his warriors. Show him more recordings. I want him to understand how helpless his kind really are. For the next hour, Jake was forced to watch videos of Zephyrian raids on human settlements. He saw cargo, ships like his own being destroyed. He watched human defense forces retreating in panic from alien attack forces. The Zephyrians provided commentary, explaining their tactics and pointing out human weaknesses. See how they bunched together when frightened, one alien said during a recording of civilians fleeing a burning city. Herd animals. They make easy targets that way. And watch this, said another, replaying a space battle where human warships were retreating. Their captains always try to save their crews instead of completing their missions. Weakness. Jake memorized every detail of the ship's layout as they walked him back to his cell. He counted the number of Zephyrians he saw and noted their weapons and equipment. He observed their guard rotations and listened to their conversations in the corridors. The aliens thought he was broken by what he had seen. They were wrong. Jake had spent 40 years in space, and he had learned that information was the most powerful weapon of all. Every fact he gathered was another tool he could use when the time came. Back in his cell, lying on the cold metal floor, Jake thought about Lisa and Danny. Their deaths would be avenged. But first he needed to survive long enough to show these alien predators what a real apex predator looked like. The Zephyrians had made one critical mistake. They assumed that because humans often chose diplomacy over violence, it meant they were incapable of violence. They were about to learn how wrong they were. 3 weeks had passed since Jake's capture. The Zephyrian ship had jumped through hyperspace 17 times, each jump taking them deeper into alien territory. Jake kept count by scratching marks into the metal wall of his cell with a piece of broken plastic from his food tray. The daily torture sessions had become routine. Kreshvar would have him brought to the command center, show him more recordings of human defeats, and mock the weakness of his species. The other Zephyrians would gather around, clicking their approval and adding their own insults. They seemed to enjoy having a captive audience for their stories of conquest. Jake said nothing during these sessions. He listened, learned, and remembered everything. By now, he knew the ship's layout better than some of the crew members. He had identified the locations of the weapons storage, the engine room, the life support systems, and the escape pods. More importantly, he had figured out the aliens' routines and weaknesses. On this particular day, something was different. The engine vibrations had changed, and Jake could hear more activity in the corridors outside his cell. Footsteps clicked past his door more frequently, and he caught fragments of conversation in the Zephyrian language. They sounded excited about something. When the guards came for him, they seemed more eager than usual. They practically dragged him through the corridors to the command center, where Kreshvar was standing before the main viewing screen with his arms spread wide. "Perfect timing, old human," the alien leader said without turning around. "You arrive just as we approach our next hunting ground." Jake looked at the screen and felt his blood turn cold. It showed a blue and green world that looked exactly like Earth. Cities dotted the continents, and he could see the lights of orbital stations circling the planet. "New Boston Colony," Kreshvar announced proudly. "Population, 400,000 humans. Established only 30 years ago, so their defenses are weak. This will be our greatest hunt yet." The other Zephyrians in the room clicked their excitement. Several of them were already checking their weapons and discussing attack strategies. "We will take at least 50,000 slaves from this world," Kreshvar continued. "The rest we will kill for sport. Their cities will burn, and their ships will be scrap metal floating in space." Jake watched the peaceful colony world on the screen and thought about all the families down there. Children playing in parks, people going to work or school, with no idea that death was coming for them from the stars. His hands clenched into fists. "You seem upset, Softshell," one of the Zephyrians said, noticing Jake's expression. "Do you know people on this world?" "All humans are the same," said another alien. "Weak prey animals who built cities instead of learning to hunt." "That is what makes your species so pathetic," Kreshvar added, finally turning to face Jake. "You had an entire planet to yourselves, and instead of becoming proper predators, you became farmers and builders. Prey behavior." Jake continued to stare at the screen, watching ships move between the orbital stations, cargo vessels and passenger transports going about their daily business. Just like the New Horizon had been doing when the Zephyrians attacked, "We are predators," Kreshvar declared, pounding his chest with a clawed fist. "We evolved to hunt and kill. Our shells protect us in battle. Our claws can cut through metal. Our pack tactics have conquered 100 worlds." The alien leader walked closer to Jake, towering over the old human. "But you, Softshell, you are prey. Your skin is thin. You have no claws or fangs. You run from danger instead of fighting. This is why we own the galaxy, and you serve as our slaves." Jake looked up at Kreshvar's compound eyes. For the first time in 3 weeks, he spoke. "You're wrong." The command center fell silent. Every Zephyrian in the room turned to stare at the human who had finally broken his silence. Kreshvar's head tilted to one side. "What did you say?" "I said you're wrong," Jake repeated, his voice calm and steady. "You think you're predators, but you don't understand what that word really means." The Zephyrians looked at each other with confusion. This was not the broken pleading they had expected from their captive. "You see," Jake continued, "humans aren't prey animals. We never were. You made a mistake about us from the very beginning." Kreshvar made a sound that might have been laughter. "Old human speaks nonsense. Look at yourself. No shell, no claws, no fangs. What predator is so weak?" "The kind that doesn't need any of those things," Jake said. "The kind that became so good at hunting that we killed off all the other predators on our world." The alien leader's amusement faded slightly. "Impossible. Prey animals do not kill predators." "We didn't start as prey," Jake explained patiently. "Humans evolved as persistence hunters. Do you know what that means? It means we hunted animals that were bigger, faster, and stronger than us. We hunted them by chasing them across vast distances until they collapsed from exhaustion. No claws needed, no fangs required, Just intelligence, endurance, and the patience to outlast anything else on the planet. Several Zephyrians clicked nervously. This was not the kind of talk they expected from a defeated prisoner. "You lie," Kreshvar said, but his voice carried less certainty than before. "On our homeworld there used to be creatures called cave bears," Jake continued. "They were twice the size of your largest warrior, with claws longer than your fingers and fangs that could crush bone. We hunted them to extinction with nothing but pointed sticks and rocks." Jake's voice grew stronger as he spoke. "There were giant cats with teeth like daggers. We killed them all. There were wolves that hunted in packs larger than your crew. We wiped them out. Every major predator that ever threatened humanity is now extinct, and we're the ones who made them extinct." The command center was completely quiet now except for the hum of the ship's engines. "You want to know the difference between you and us?" Jake asked, looking directly at Kreshvar. "You evolved to hunt specific prey in specific environments. You're specialized predators. But we evolved to hunt everything everywhere under any conditions. We're not just predators. We're apex predators." Kreshvar took a step backward. "You speak like a warrior, but I have seen humans in battle. They flee." "Sometimes," Jake agreed, "because we're smart enough to know when to retreat and when to attack. That's not weakness, that's strategy. A true predator doesn't waste energy on fights it can't win." "But you are old and weak," another Zephyrian protested. "Look at you. One blow from my claw would kill you." Jake smiled for the first time since his capture. It was not a pleasant smile. "Age doesn't make a predator less dangerous, it makes them more experienced. I've been hunting for longer than you've been alive." "Hunting what?" Kreshvar demanded. "Everything," Jake said simply. "Pirates in the Outer Rim, rebels during the colonial wars, alien raiders who thought humans would be easy prey. I've been tracking, studying, and killing things like you for 40 years. The Zephyrians exchanged uncertain looks. Their prisoner was supposed to be broken by now, begging for mercy or crying in despair. Instead, he was talking like a predator describing his hunting techniques. "You made one critical mistake," Jake told them. "You assumed that because humans choose diplomacy when possible, it means we're incapable of violence. You thought our peaceful colonies and trade agreements were signs of weakness." Jake's eyes grew cold as winter space. "But we didn't build a peaceful civilization because we're weak. We built it because we're the most dangerous predators the galaxy has ever seen, and we know what happens when apex predators stop controlling themselves." The ship's alarm suddenly began to sound. The alarm sounds echoed through the Zephyrian ship like the screams of dying metal. Red warning lights flashed across every surface, turning the command center into a nightmare of blood-colored shadows. The aliens looked around in confusion as displays began showing system failure warnings. "What is happening?" Kreshvar roared, his claws clicking rapidly across control panels. "Why are the alarms sounding?" One of his warriors rushed to a nearby console. "Pack leader, we have multiple system failures. Life support is failing in sections 7 through 12. Engine power is dropping. Navigation is offline." Another Zephyrian called out from across the room. "The hyperspace drive is overheating. If we don't shut it down, it could explode." Jake stood calmly in the center of the chaos, watching the aliens panic as their perfect predator machine began falling apart around them. The smile never left his face. "Impossible," Kreshvar snarled, spinning to face his prisoner. "These systems do not fail by themselves. What have you done?" "I told you," Jake said quietly, his voice somehow carrying over the noise of alarms and shouting aliens. "Humans are apex predators. We adapted to hunt anything, anywhere, under any conditions. That includes hunting on alien starships." The pack leader's compound eyes went wide with understanding. "You sabotaged our ship. But how?" "You were locked. In your cell." "Was I?" Jake asked. "Or did you just think I was locked up? You see, that's another thing about apex predators. We're very good at making other creatures think we're helpless when we're actually studying them." During his 3 weeks of captivity, Jake had done much more than count scratches on his cell wall. The food slot in his door was large enough for a thin man to squeeze through if he dislocated his shoulder and compressed his ribs. It had taken him 6 days to learn how to do it without making noise. After that, Jake had spent every sleep cycle exploring the ship. The Zephyrians were so confident in their prison that they never posted guards in the lower levels. Jake had crawled through maintenance tunnels, memorized the layout of critical systems, and learned which components were essential for the ship's operation. "You made it easy for me," Jake continued as sparks began raining from damaged ceiling panels. "Your people never learned to hunt something that fights back with its brain instead of claws. You never thought to check if your prey was actually as helpless as it looked." The ship shuddered as another system failed. Through the main viewing screen, Jake could see that they were dropping out of hyperspace. The blue and green world of New Boston Colony appeared ahead of them, but now the Zephyrian ship was limping toward it like a wounded animal. "Pack leader," one of the warriors called out urgently. "We need repair teams in the engine room immediately, and someone needs to check the life support systems." Kreshvar's head swiveled between his crew and his prisoner. Jake could see the UO alien leader's mind working, trying to decide between fixing his ship and dealing with the human who had somehow turned it into a flying wreck. "Take repair teams to the engine room," Kreshvar ordered. "Send others to life support. We can still complete our hunt if we can restore main power." As the Zephyrians scattered to their emergency stations, Jake noticed something important. The HFY aliens were splitting up just like he had hoped they would. Pack hunters were strongest when they stayed together, but a crisis forced them to divide their numbers. "You will not escape, old human," Kreshvar said, pulling a weapon from his belt. It looked like a combination of a blade and an energy gun. "I will watch you personally while my warriors repair the damage you have caused." "You still don't understand," Jake said, shaking his head sadly. "I'm not trying to escape. I'm hunting." Before Kreshvar could respond, the lights went out completely. Emergency power kicked in a few seconds later. But now the command center was lit only by dim red bulbs that cast everything in bloody shadows. In those few seconds of total darkness, Jake moved. Not toward the door or the escape pods, but toward a maintenance panel he had spotted during his earlier visits to this room. His fingers found the emergency release for the panel, and he slipped inside just as the emergency lights came on. "Where is he?" Kreshvar shouted, spinning around the empty command center. "Find the human, search every corridor." But Jake was already gone, crawling through the maintenance tunnels that ran between the ship's decks. He had spent weeks learning these passages. He knew where they led and which ones connected to critical systems. The Zephyrians had made their second major mistake. They had assumed that an old human would be slow and clumsy in an emergency. They were wrong. Jake had been moving through the tight spaces of starships since before most of these aliens were born. He reached his first destination, the armory. The Zephyrians kept their weapons in a secured room 3 decks below the command center. Jake had found it during his nightly explorations and had already figured out how to disable the electronic lock. The armory door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, Jake found racks of alien weapons and armor. He took a cutting tool that could slice through metal, 2 energy weapons, and a belt full of explosive charges. He also grabbed a set of Zephyrian armor that was small enough to fit him. As he put on the alien armor, Jake could hear footsteps and shouting voices echoing through the ship's corridors. The Zephyrians were searching for him, but they were looking in all the wrong places. They expected him to head for the escape pods or try to send a distress signal. They didn't realize he was preparing to hunt them. Jake's next stop was the life support control room. This was where the ship's air recycling and atmospheric systems were managed. He placed explosive charges on 3 key components, then used the cutting tool to damage several backup systems. When he triggered the charges, whole sections of the ship would lose breathable air. The Zephyrians would have to split up even more to make emergency repairs, giving Jake the advantage he needed. From life support, Jake moved to the power distribution center. Here he could control which parts of the ship had electricity and which parts would be plunged into darkness. He set up a timer that would shut down power to different sections on a rotating schedule. The Zephyrians were pack hunters who relied on superior numbers and coordination. Jake was taking away both advantages by forcing them to work alone in the dark. His final preparation was in the ship's communications center. Jake couldn't send a message to warn New Boston Colony, but he could make sure the Zephyrians couldn't coordinate their hunt either. He used the cutting tool to destroy the main communication array and damaged several backup systems. By the time Jake was finished with his preparations, he had been moving through the ship for over an hour. The Zephyrians were still searching for him, but now they were doing it in small groups of 2 or 3 instead of large hunting packs. Jake smiled as he settled into position in a maintenance tunnel overlooking one of the main corridors. He had weapons, armor, and the advantage of knowing the ship better than its own crew. Most importantly, he had something the Zephyrians didn't understand: patience. Apex predators didn't always strike immediately. Sometimes they waited for the perfect moment when their prey was most vulnerable. That moment was coming soon. Jake heard footsteps approaching in the corridor below. 2 Zephyrians were walking together, their voices tense with worry about the ship's failing systems. They had no idea that death was watching them from above. The hunt was about to begin. Jake waited in the darkness of the maintenance tunnel, watching the 2 Zephyrians walk beneath him. They were talking in worried voices about the ship's failing systems, their compound eyes darting nervously at every shadow. The red emergency lights made their shells look like they were covered in blood. The human could not have caused all this damage, one of them said. These are complex systems. No prey animal understands such technology. Pack leader believes otherwise, the second alien replied. He says the old soft shell has been moving through the ship like a ghost. Jake smiled grimly. They still didn't understand what they were dealing with. Even now, after everything he had told them, they couldn't accept that a human might be more dangerous than they were. He waited until both aliens had passed directly under his hiding spot, then dropped silently from the tunnel opening. The Zephyrian armor he wore muffled the sound of his landing. Before either alien could turn around, Jake's cutting tool sliced through the first one's neck joint where the shell was thinnest. The creature fell without making a sound. Its companion spun around just in time to see Jake's energy weapon pointed at its head. "One sound and you die," Jake whispered. The Zephyrian's claws twitched toward its own weapon, but Jake pressed the energy gun harder against its skull. "I wouldn't," Jake said calmly. "I've been watching you hunt for weeks. I know all your moves before you make them. That's what apex predators do. We study our prey." The alien's compound eyes reflected fear for the first time since Jake had been captured. You are just one old human. We are many. Numbers don't matter when you're being hunted by something smarter than you," Jake replied. "Ask the cave. Bears and saber-toothed cats on my homeworld." "Oh wait, you can't. They're all extinct." Jake triggered his prepared explosives. Throughout the ship, charges went off in the life support systems. Alarms screamed as whole sections lost breathable air. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, trapping Zephyrians in isolated compartments. "What have you done?" the alien gasped. "I'm doing what humans do best," Jake said. "I'm adapting the environment to hunt you. On my world, we used to drive entire herds of mammoths off cliffs. We changed the landscape itself into a weapon." The Zephyrian tried to run, but Jake's energy blast caught it in the back. The alien collapsed, its shell cracked and smoking. Jake picked up the dead alien's weapons and continued through the ship. His timer activated, cutting power to different sections in a rotating pattern. Corridors plunged into darkness, then came back to life, then went dark again. The Zephyrians' voices echoed through the ship as they called out to each other, trying to regroup. But Jake had spent 3 weeks learning their language, their tactics, and their weaknesses. He knew they would try to gather at the command center. He also knew the fastest routes to get there, and more importantly, he knew how to cut those routes off. In the next corridor, Jake found 3 Zephyrians working frantically to repair a damaged power coupling. They were so focused on their task that they didn't notice him until his cutting tool had already disabled 2 of them. The third managed to draw its weapon, but Jake was faster. "Impossible," the dying alien wheezed. "Soft shells do not hunt like this." "We invented hunting like this," Jake told it. "Patience, planning, using the environment as a weapon. We've been doing it for 1,000,000 years." By the time Jake reached the upper levels of the ship, he had eliminated 8 Zephyrians. The remaining crew members were scattered, confused, and running out of breathable air in many sections of their vessel. Their perfect hunting machine had become a trap, and they were the ones caught inside it. Jake found Kreshvar in the command center, frantically trying to restore communications while his remaining warriors stood guard. The pack leader looked up as Jake stepped through the doorway, now fully armored in Zephyrian gear and carrying enough weapons to outfit a small army. "You," Kreshvar snarled. "I should have killed you immediately." "Yes, you should have," Jake agreed. "That's the difference between a predator and an apex predator. You kept me alive because you thought I was entertaining. I would have killed you the moment I realized you were a threat." The remaining Zephyrians raised their weapons, but Jake was already moving. The cutting tool in his left hand sliced through one alien's weapon while the energy gun in his right eliminated another. Years of combat experience guided his movements as he flowed between his enemies like water around rocks. "How?" Kreshvar demanded as his last warrior fell. "How does one old human defeat an entire hunting pack?" "Because I'm not just one old human," Jake said, advancing on the alien leader. "I'm the product of 4 billion years of evolution that turned my species into the most successful predators in the galaxy. Every human carries the genetic memory of 1,000,000 successful hunts." Kreshvar lashed out with his claws, but Jake had seen the attack coming. He stepped aside and brought his cutting tool down on the alien's arm, severing it at the elbow. "We didn't conquer our homeworld with claws or fangs or shells," Jake continued, as Kreshvar collapsed, green blood pooling around him. "We conquered it with our minds. We learned to make every environment into our hunting ground, every situation into our advantage." The alien pack leader's breathing was growing shallow. "Your kind will still fall. There are too many of us. Across the galaxy." "That's where you're wrong," Jake said, moving to the communications console. "You see, there's one more thing about apex predators that you never understood." Jake's fingers flew over the controls, accessing the ship's long-range communication array. He had damaged the local systems, but the emergency transmitter was still functional. "We don't just hunt alone," Jake said as he began broadcasting on all Zephyrian military frequencies. "When we find a threat to our pack, we warn the others." Jake's message went out across subspace, carrying his voice to every Zephyrian ship, base, and colony within 100 light-years. He told them about the failed hunt, about how a single old human had destroyed an entire pack of their finest warriors. He described in detail how he had turned their own ship against them, how he had hunted them through corridors they thought they controlled. "This is Commander Jake Morrison of the human cargo vessel New Horizon," he said into the transmitter. "To any Zephyrian listening to this message, understand that you have made a critical error about my species." Jake looked down at Kreshvar's dying form. "You thought we were prey because we choose diplomacy when possible. You mistook our desire for peace as weakness. You assumed that because we don't attack first, we don't know how to attack at all, my old human's voice grew cold as the vacuum of space. "But we are not prey animals, we never were. We are apex predators who built a civilization based on cooperation instead of conquest. We are the species that hunted everything else on our planet to extinction, then decided to be better than our nature." Jake paused, letting his words sink in across the galaxy. "You have awakened something in humanity that we have spent centuries trying to control. You have reminded us what we were before we chose to be civilized." Through the ship's view screen, Jake could see New Boston Colony growing larger. The planet's defense forces were already mobilizing, warned by his broadcast of the approaching threat. "Consider this your only warning," Jake continued. "Leave human space, leave human colonies alone. Find other prey because we are not prey. We are the apex predators of Earth, and Earth does not forget its children." Jake ended the transmission and began preparing the ship's escape pod. Kreshvar was dead now, and the remaining Zephyrians were either dead or dying in the damaged sections of their vessel. As he climbed into the escape pod, Jake thought about Lisa and Danny. Their deaths had been avenged, but more importantly, their killer's fate would serve as a warning to every predator species in the galaxy. The pod launched toward New Boston Colony, leaving the crippled Zephyrian ship drifting in space. Jake's message was already spreading through the galactic communication networks, carried by traders, diplomats, and refugees to every corner of known space. Within days, reports began filtering in from across human territory. Alien raiding parties, that had been harassing human settlements for years suddenly changed course and disappeared into deep space. Pirates who had preyed on human cargo ships began avoiding human trade routes entirely. The galaxy had learned a lesson that humans had hoped never to teach. There is a difference between choosing peace and being incapable of war. Humanity had revealed its true nature not through conquest or aggression, but through the actions of one old man who refused to let predators threaten his pack. Jake Morrison had reminded the galaxy that humans were not prey animals who had stumbled into space travel. They were apex predators who had chosen to build something better than an empire based on fear, and sometimes that made them more dangerous than any mere predator could ever be.